What's happening, guys? It's Cooper Carter here for G66, and on this week's Fractal Friday, we're going to be talking about using two amplifier blocks in the same preset. So this week's episode is just for Axe-Fx III and FM9 users. The FM3 allows only one amplifier block, but FM3 guys, maybe watch this video anyway. You might learn some things about the cabinet block, which we're going to also get into in some detail here in this video. This episode was inspired by a session I had this week with a great jazz guitarist named Doug Wamble, who lives in New York, and he's just diving into using two amplifier blocks in his FM9. So I thought it would be really useful to a lot of people if I went over some of the basic setups using two amplifier blocks. And for more advanced users who've been using two amps for a while, I hope you catch a couple of tips here as well. Leveraging two different amplifier blocks in one preset opens up a world of tonal possibilities. You're not just getting 2 times the tone, it really is more like 10 times the tone because of the different options. And I'm going to go through a couple very different setups, one pretty basic, one going into stereo, and then I'll show you kind of my preferred setup for using two amps that I think gives you the ultimate amount of flexibility to really shape some pretty incredible and layered tones. So let's dive in. All right, so first off, I want to stress that if you guys are watching this video on a phone or a tablet or even a laptop, you are going to miss a lot of what we're going to get into. There is going to be a lot of stereo use in a couple of minutes, and really the subtleties of mixing these amps are going to be lost unless you're either on a pair of headphones, where it will be very obvious, or you're on a good set of studio monitors. That way you will really hear exactly what's going on. So what I've got here is a very basic dual amp setup that combines two very different kinds of amps. We've got a 5F1 Tweed EC, so your classic Fender Tweed amp, and we've got a Plexi 100 watt based on a Marshall. Of course, this is a really aggressive sound, and this is more of a kind of clean sound. So if I go ahead, since I have the bypass mode of these amplifiers set to mute, when I bypass this Plexi, we'll hear just the Tweed. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, I'm going to go ahead and turn on our Plexi. And I'm running both of these amps into the same cabinet block that's got a really nice array of impulse responses picked out. I've got 4 different IRs, so the full breadth of the cabinet block. I've got 2 different 57 IRs that I've got hard panned left and right. I've got a 121 on the same 412. And finally, I've got a brand new full res IR, a 412 Brit Greenback room mic. I've got it mixed down just to give a little bit of room to the sound. And when I turn both amps on, you've got a beautiful example of what is possible with 2 different amps coming from very different sides of the gain spectrum. This is a technique that has been used on so many different records. It really was pioneered by guys like Jimmy Page, and it allows you to just get that punch with every single note and chord, even with a lot of gain, which of course gain naturally is more of a compressed sound, and you start losing the transients the more gain you get. You are losing no transients here though, because you've got that Tweed giving you punch and the Plexi giving you grit. So I've got these 2 amps mixed to where I like the levels between them. I'm getting just enough punch from the Tweed and just enough grit from the Plexi. But if you guys download this preset, and as always, of course, the link to the preset on the Axe Change is in the description of this video, you guys can play with the levels here. Maybe you want a little less Plexi. Now remember, of course, that you will want to adjust the Tweed to compensate so that your output stays constant. So let me show you what I mean. With the bypass mode on mute, what I can do is go in and individually tweak these amps to where I want them. And once I have the tones set to where I want them, which I do, I can then use these level knobs here to adjust how much of each signal I'm getting. Now, following the best practice rule of where to have every preset hitting as far as the output level, I have gotten these balanced to where the difference between them gives me the tone that I want. But then when I play them together, if I hit a big open chord, I'm hitting right around 0 dB. So maybe you want more Tweed and less Plexi, in which case you can go here and just adjust up 2 dB on the Tweed, down 2 dB on the Plexi, and you'll still be hitting where you want to be. So download the preset and tweak these two amps to your liking. I think this strikes a really nice balance and gives a great layered tone. So now let's look at something a bit more advanced. If I go up to scene 2 here, I've got what I'm calling Brit stereo. And I've got a Class A 30 watt, of course, based on an AC30. So I've got a Vox, and then we're gonna keep our Plexi here. So I've got a Vox and a Marshall, dueling it out and creating an ultimate Brit tone. Now notice though, that what I've gone ahead and done is changed the balance on these amplifiers so that the Vox is all the way left and the Plexi is all the way right. And what I've done is gone into my cabinet block, and on channel B for scene 2 here, I've created a stereo cabinet block. So the input mode is on stereo, which means that now, given what these amp blocks are set to, this cabinet block is going to hear only the Class A on the left and only the Plexi coming in on the right. What I have is one cab here, left, that is a Class A type IR, and I have one cab here, right, that is more of a Brit style IR. I've gone ahead and hard pan those left and right, but let's solo just this left one. And you can hear that this cabinet being left, it is only listening to this Class A amp that is hard panned left. So no matter where we put this pan, you are hearing only the Class A amp, but we can pan it wherever we want. So with it hard panned left, we're hearing the Class A hard panned left. And with this hard pan right, we're hearing this Plexi hard panned right. So when I now combine them, we're hearing one amp on the left and one amp on the right for an ultimate Brit stereo rock field. I've also added 2 appropriate full res IRs here, and if I turn those both on, what you'll hear is a little bit of room on each side coming from a room impulse response of an appropriate cab for each of these amps. And when I'm setting my levels, of course, my amps are hard panned left and right, so it's very easy. I can just look at the output block, and on the left and the right, we should be getting about the same level given where I've set the amp. You can, of course, use these meters, but as always, I say trust your ears more than your eyes. And if you guys see them hitting the same, but you're hearing them a little bit differently, go ahead and adjust one. So again, keep in mind that these left and right cabinet slots, because our amplifier blocks are hard panned left and right, are only going to be listening to their respective amplifiers. So we can play with these pan knobs here and not change what these IRs are hearing, but we rather can change where they are in the stereo field. So let's go ahead and pan both of these directly to the center, but leave our room mics out to the right and the left. So even when using just one cabinet block for 2 different amps, you can get a great amount of control over your stereo field, get a really powerful sound, and blend 2 different amps in a lot of really interesting ways. But let's take a look now at what I consider kind of the ideal setup, as long as you have the CPU available in your preset to do it. All right, so here I've returned to our original Tweed and Plexi. Now you'll notice that our balance here has returned to the center on each of the amps. Also, again, notice that our bypass modes are on mute so that when we do not have an amp active, it isn't passing the DI signal that's running straight from the input and then through this cabinet block to the reverb. So we want the amps that are not on to not pass signal. That enables us to switch cleanly between the two amps. And each amp has its own cabinet block, so this can be a little bit more straightforward for people, so you don't have to worry about panning the amps and which amp is going where when you're just using one cab block. Now again, this will use a little bit more CPU since you are using two different cabinets, and especially if you load up your cabinet block with 4 different impulse responses on each one, you're going to be cooking the CPU pretty hot. So what I have here is the Tweed running into an assortment of impulse responses, and the way that I selected these was simply to start with a good 57 in the picker. I went ahead and pinned this and played a little bit. Until I was happy. And then I just unmuted the next one and picked an IR the same way, unmuted the next one and picked an IR, and then unmuted this and picked a different IR until everything was full. I started playing with the levels, I started playing with the panning a little bit, and I got a nice full sound. And then I did the exact same thing in the next scene with the Plexi. So I've got the Plexi running into its own cabinet block, and here I've got a 412-57, a 412-121, kind of a classic combo. And then I've mixed a 421 in and a 40-47 for what I think is a really nice tone. And of course, the benefit here of using 2 cabinet blocks is you have 4 slots for each amp, so you can really get into that blending as if you're sitting in front of a great mixing console with a ton of mics on a cab in a live room, and you're just mixing until you hear that sweet spot. So if I move up to scene 3 now, what we have is a combination of our Tweed and our Plexi running through 8 different impulse responses that we have crafted to sound great with each amp, and we get this beautiful mix that is much more complex, much more sonically rich than our basic preset that we had here, where we had each amp simply running into the same cabinet block with 4 different IRs. So we have the beautiful combination again of the sparkly, punchy Tweed with the overdriven, gritty Plexi coming together to create a layered, complex sound. But let's talk about our levels, because there's something to keep in mind here when we're using 2 different amps in 2 different rows. So if you look at my Tweed here, if I play, you see I'm hitting right at about 0. And if you look at my Plexi, you see that that one also is hitting right at about 0. So I've set these amplifier levels for each amp to hit 0 independently, since we have scenes where they are being used independently. So our Tweed scene, our Plexi scene. So on our combo scene, of course, you're probably ahead of me, we're going to have 2 amps together. That's going to be a good bit louder than 0 dB. Now that may be what you want, but for the purposes of the session that I was in earlier this week that inspired this video, using each amp separately and using them together needed to always be at the same level. So what are we going to do about the fact that when we combine the amps, they're louder? Well, the easiest way to do that is simply go into the output block, go to Scene Levels, and on Scene 3 here, I'm just going to take the level down by about 4 dB. And let's check the output level. So that's about right. So now, when we go to Scene 1, we've got our Tweed. Scene 2, we've got our Plexi. And scene 3, we've got them together. And they're all pretty much in the same ballpark. Very easy using the scene levels parameter here. So here's one more trick, and one of my favorite things to do. What I've done here is added 2 volume blocks, one in line with each amp. And on this first one, I've got it attached to FC1 pedal 1, so a pedal attached to my FC, but I've changed the start value of the controller to 100 and the end value to 0. So now on this second volume block, I've done the inverse, and I have it set kind of the standard way with the start at 0 and the end at 100. Now what this means is that when my heel is down, the Plexi is muted and there's full signal going into the Tweed. And then when I push my toe up, what I'm gonna have is, of course, the opposite of that. So I'll bring the pedal heel down, and we have brought the volume on the Tweed all the way up to 10. And as I move the toe up, we blend seamlessly into the Plexi. You can use this as a really smooth way to blend between the different tones, finding out where the sweet spot for you is in the mix between the clean and the dirty, or whichever amps you're choosing. This can also be a really nice option live when you're playing and going between 2 different amps. Instead of using a switch to maybe switch scenes or channels in a kind of A or B situation, instead, you've got this gradual swell that you could use to great effect during a song coming from a clean part into a dirty part. Instead of a dramatic shift, it can be more of a swell to kind of bring in the emotion of a change. Now, some of you may be wondering why I don't use a mixer at the end of the chain for this and then attach the modifiers inverse to row 3 and 4's gains instead of the 2 volume blocks. The answer is you can't bypass the mixer, and so those controllers would be active even in the scenes where I've got the amps soloed here. So for this particular preset, that wouldn't have worked. But if you did have a preset that was just a blending type thing, you could, of course, use a mixer and just have 1 block there instead of the 2 volumes. So as with all of my videos, I hope that you guys have seen that the processes involved here are pretty straightforward. And if you just keep a couple of things in mind, depending on what setup you're using, you can really unlock a ton of tones very easily. And the endless possibilities are really only limited by your imagination. There are really no wrong answers here as far as what you want to pan, what different mics you want to use, what kind of amps you want to combine. I've combined some pretty standard duos here, but there's nothing that says you can't go wild, because this is the world of Fractal and anything that you can click with the mouse is possible. So go crazy. Get some high gain amps in there, meld a couple of different ones together, get some super clean amps, leverage the different strengths of different amps and combine them together. And if you guys want to dig even deeper into the world of Fractal audio, look no further than my complete Axe-Fx III, FM9 coming very soon, and FM3 masterclasses available at classes.coopercarter.com. As always, guys, if you enjoyed this video, please do make sure to subscribe to G66, give this video a thumbs up, and leave me a comment in the comments below, or chime in on the Fractal Audio Forum in the Fractal Friday thread, and let me know what you guys think. Let me know what you're up to. Let me know what kind of tones you guys are making and what you found useful. I'd also like to mention that I do check the forum and these comments for requests, so if there's something that you'd like to see covered on Fractal Friday, let me know. I've done a couple of them before, and I'm more than happy to do more. So if you guys want to see something, drop a comment and we'll make it happen. For G66, I'm Cooper Carter, and I'll see you guys next week on Fractal Friday.